do touch on water, and we're trying to develop landscapes that will meet the growing demands of our population that is rapidly growing in north central Texas. But before we talk about the future, I want to kind of go back in time a little bit. And the ideas of beauty in our landscapes has really changed over the past 50 to 100 years. If we look at this picture right here in the landscape, we see that landscape is dominated by turf grass, and that maybe there's one tree there in the front of the house. Unfortunately, it looks a little sickly. There's a foundation planting with some shrubs there, but really the dominant species in the 1950s and 60s was turf grass. Anybody recognize this picture by chance? Yeah, Leave It to Beaver. It belongs to that famous TV family. Now let's fast forward, 15, 20 years or so. We see this landscape, although there is a lot of turf grass in the area along the foundation. We have a deeper planting, so a variety of different shrubs, but also some perennials there. The edges of the landscape are also softened with the parkway, and then the entry by the sidewalk have some planting of perennial plants there. And then you notice on the far left side of the screen, there's a little arroyo or a dry riverbed, and I'm imagining that their cistern, or the rainwater harvesting cistern, is just right behind there. We don't know for sure though. But it's funny that in that 10 to 15 year period, less turf grass, more perennial plants in typical landscape designs. Anybody recognize this house? This one has just famously been bought and redone, and now I don't know if that episode has aired yet, but that'll be on HGTV going forward. Yeah, the Brady Bunch. And then now if we fast forward to more modern times, you see there's even further reduced turf grass area. We have landscapes that incorporate native and adapted plant material for butterflies and beneficial for wildlife, but also landscapes now, it's more of the norm to incorporate food again. And so plants that have ornamental and edible value incorporated into an existing landscape are really one of the hottest new design trends that we've seen in the past few years. Anybody recognize this house? Oh, they're good. Yeah, this is a hard one. Modern Family. It's funny. This is one of the first episodes, a picture. They don't look like that anymore. They're now in college and home. But yeah, ideas of beauty have begun to change. Now, when I talk about edible landscapes, some people may think that we're talking about row cropping, traditional vegetable gardens, and certainly that is an edible landscape that I think the majority of us grew up with. Now you're hearing about people ripping up the entirety of their front lawn and planting raised beds like we see pictured here. That's not exactly what we'll be talking about today, but to each their own. This one happens to belong to that cat. I don't know how many times I shared this picture before somebody was like, whose cat is that? And I was like, oh, I never noticed the cat. Raised beds are, though, I think something that we see as we fast forwarded. People, anybody like the soil at their house, gardening in their soil? Usually we have a couple people raise their hand and we say, you either live in one of the sandy areas of north central Texas or you've lived there 30 years and been amending with compost. But no, this is more of what we'll be focusing on this morning. There's two plants pictured. These are one of my favorite, actually. Some of my undergraduate research was in Blackfoot daisy, a really tough Texas native plant. But all the other plants are in there. It looks pretty, but these are edibles. We've got artichokes right here, and thyme, Swiss chard, some mustard greens. And there are a lot of plants that have rich colors and textures. Many times we see Swiss chard. In fact, before I got into horticulture, I actually used to work for a custom home builder. And through that process of building somebody's home, typically it would take a year to a year and a half, unfortunately, but they got to know that I was interested in plants. And you really build a relationship. They're calling me nights and weekends. Hey, how do I run this microwave again, or the dishwasher? And so I would be talking to these people, and I would just grab a piece of Swiss chard from their landscape bed and start munching it as we're talking. And like, what are you doing? You're crazy. You can't eat that. I'm like, this is the same Swiss chard that you would be going and buying from the grocery store. It's just commonly used in the landscape industry as an ornamental as well. But there are a lot of vegetables and perennial plants, trees that can be combined with different colors and textures for that ornamental value. So it's actually one of the fastest growing trends in landscape design. 35% of folks in the US are now growing some of their own food, 42 million households. A lot of times millennials get a bad rap. I don't know why, but we've seen a 63% increase in millennials growing some of their own food. So that's some of the highest number we've seen with them just in the past couple of years. And really, I think the special thing about that is that connects people with their parents and their grandparents, their love of gardening and growing food, which is really special. People also see it as a solution to different social and environmental issues, reducing food waste. 90% of our food waste, unfortunately, ends up in landfills, making one of the largest components of our landfill trash. And so if you grow food at home, you're less likely to let that food spoil. You're actually more likely to eat it. Food security, unfortunately, areas not too far from where we are now have challenges in terms of food access. So when we teach people how to grow food, you can empower them with the ability to grow nutritious, healthy food at home. Food transport miles, when you go to the grocery store, you may want to buy fresh fruits and vegetables. The average miles it takes to get to your doorstep is about 1,200. If you're buying organic, it's a little bit longer, about 1,300 miles to get to our doorstep. And then there's a lot of wasted water and fossil fuels, other natural resources that are associated with growing that and shipping it to us those thousands of miles away. There's also depletion of arable land. So I don't know how many times people in this room have said, I remember when this was just fields as far as the eye can see. And there's been so much development here. I catch myself doing it now too. I'm a new dad. I think that's a rite of passage. You have to say, oh, I remember when this was fields. But it was, and there's less places to grow food here in the DFW Metroplex, and so that is a challenge. Like I said, it's one of the hottest new design trends. So if you do check out different landscape magazines, you'll see various articles talking about incorporating food plants in your home landscape. Selfish plug, you may have caught last year's article in the Dallas Morning News. You'll notice the author there is somebody that's talking to you now. But there are some challenges to growing plants in Texas, and especially food plants. We may not live in the hottest part of Texas, but we live in a spot of extremes. In fact, this September was the hottest and driest September on record, which is an interesting juxtaposition because last September was the wettest on record. And so you don't know if you're going to get kind of feast or famine in terms of rainfall, and also the temperatures are challenging. Sunlight's definitely challenging in terms of growing your own food. You may not have a spot for a large vegetable garden because of sunlight, but you may have smaller pockets in your existing landscape that have the conditions just right for growing plants. Weeds not only compete with our plants for sunlight, water, and nutrients, but some of those plants, if you come to the foraging class, we're teaching one in a few weeks, we'll talk about the edible value of many of our weeds that were vegetables that people took advantage of for thousands of years. Pests are a challenge specifically in the vegetable garden when you're trying to grow edible crops, and so when you incorporate edible plants throughout your landscape, there's some confusion with the pests. If you don't have a large row of something planted close together, you tend to have less insect pressure there. And then water is a growing problem. And of course, our program is focused on water conservation, so I want to touch on that a little bit more. Now, it's not a matter of if, but when we're going to see drought in Texas. In fact, parts of north central Texas are now moving back into moderate and severe drought. And even though we're kind of transitioning into the growing season, if we incorporate the best management practices in terms of water efficiency, then we're going to be doing better when we do see that next drought. And that's even more important with our edible plants that tend to be higher water users. So it's a little bit harder sell to talk about water conservation, especially last fall and early spring when all the the reservoirs are full. But one of the things that is so important is that we need to increasingly conserve water, because we live in not only the fastest growing area in the state of Texas, but now we live in the fastest growing area in the country. A study came out 2 months ago that listed DFW area as the fastest growing area in the country. So we have to figure out how to do more with less water. Specifically, tied into growing edible plants, what's your water footprint? Water you're using, your home, your business, your landscape, or in food production is something that we could all be thinking about going forward. Now, an estimate in the state of Texas, in the next 50 years, will reach 54 million people. If you thought traffic was bad this morning, imagine what it is going to be like in the next 50 years. I kind of hope I'm not around to have to deal with that traffic. But there's growth and prosperity, and I think that's good. But food, about 2/3 of our water footprint we can tie in food production, and then 80% of all agriculture as a whole consumes our water resources. Now, when we teach these programs, we always talk about native and adapted plants. Anybody here new to the Metroplex or new to Texas? A lot of times when people are first moving to DFW, they think, A, that we're going to ride horses everywhere. They think that we're going to live like the show Dallas. But I also think that our landscape is one like this. So yucca, cacti, rocks, agave, and really this is a great Texas native landscape. But this is what your vegetable garden should look like as well. If you're growing vegetables in Texas, you need to have that nice foundation of rocks, some smaller rocks, larger rocks, and then you can eat the cactus and the yucca. And obviously, I'm kidding. You can grow lush, vibrant plants with a variety of textures and colors in our 36-inch rainfall year. In fact, a lot of these plants are edible. This is one of my favorite, a loquat. It's an evergreen, large shrub, small tree. Looks very similar to magnolia, planted for its evergreen foliage, but also every 2 or 3 years, if it doesn't get too cold in the winter, you'll have some nice plum-sized fruit that to me tastes like a mango, and highly water efficient, just great plants. We'll talk more as we go forward. And so just talking a little bit more about design trends. Each year, the American Society of Landscape Architects does a survey where they ask their LAs, what are customers asking for in a landscape? And this is last year's result, 88% interested in rainwater harvesting, a lot interested in native plants, pervious paving, but 75% of Americans are now interested in edible landscapes, incorporating edible plants in their own food with a lot of the other principles that we talk about in some of our programs at Water University. So really, what is an edible landscape, though? We're just using the practical integration of food plants within that ornamental setting. So we're using the same design principles that we would use in the other parts of our landscape. We're just substituting edible plants for otherwise unproductive plant material. And I would argue you should look at your problem areas. These are high water using plants, perhaps plants that aren't very well adapted. I'm sorry, the folks that love hydrangeas and azaleas, those really just take so much work. There are other plants like red-tip photinias that have disease problems. There are plants like privet that tend to overseed and kind of mess up all of our natural areas. Those plants, if you're tired of them, consider removing those, and then the efforts that you spend to growing those, whether that's extra water, extra fertilizer, extra maintenance, well, if you're growing food plants there, you actually get some return on your investment. I also like to stack functions. So if a plant is going in my landscape, my wife and I moved into our home about 1.5 years ago, and so it's go through the checklist. The first thing is it's got to look pretty, right? I have master gardeners that live just a couple of houses down from me. People know what I do. All my neighbors know. They read the article in the Dallas Morning News or a segment on TV, and they go peek at my yard, make sure I'm doing the right things. Hopefully most of the time I am. But it's got to look great, first of all, and then I want it to taste delicious. I'm a big guy. I like to eat. And so if something has edible value, then it has a better place in my landscape, and I want to plant more of it. Also, plants that attract pollinators, whether those are our migrating monarchs we have coming through right now, but our various native bees and European bees, especially in terms of food production. Our pollinators are going to help increase food production by pollinating and fertilizing our plants, and then help save water. So water is a growing issue. If there's a plant in my landscape, it's got to look good, taste good, maybe it provides habitat for wildlife, but it's got to be a low water user too, because we have to meet that demand of a growing population. And then there's other plants that we'll talk about, like our herbs, that have other uses around the home. The other neat thing about edible landscaping, and for me, it was something that was passed down from my grandmother and also friends of the family, but it puts us back in touch with the land that we live on. So somebody in our family tree, there's a diverse group of folks in here, somebody in your family grew their own food. And to get back to doing that, I think that is something that's special and innate in all of us. And to pass that love of healthy food and just food that tastes better to the next generation, I think is something very special. So I haven't been gardening a lot with my daughter yet. She's 4 months old at this point. But my nephews and my godkids, to take them out, and they grew up eating carrots, but had never seen a carrot actually plucked from the ground. And they thought the carrots come in a bag from a grocery store that they're just little carrot nubs on there. So that, I think, is something that is special in all of us. And then just eating food that's healthier for us. You know where your food comes from. And then food that tastes better. And I think that's something that we can all get behind. Who here thinks that a tomato from the grocery store tastes the same as a tomato picked in your own backyard? Or the peach that you smell at the grocery store walking through the aisles, and it looks like a peach, it smells like a peach, but then when you bite into it, it tastes like the cardboard box that they shipped it in. So, when I talk about the practical integration of food plants, that could be in a raised bed setting, or it could be just starting small with container gardening. You could, though, go big and just design an entire section of your landscape with edible plants. Now, many of our edible plants, wherever they were indigenous to, they have a specific niche or functions in society. So we have, if we walk to maybe a creek area around a grapevine, you would notice pecan trees, right? It's kind of one of the overstory trees. Well, certainly they kind of function, serving as a upper canopy tree. They produce fruit and nuts that we can eat. There are other plants that are more viney. So grapevine is one of those, right? You may see a grapevine growing up that pecan tree. You also see understory trees. I saw American beautyberry right here. It's a plant that you can eat the fruit on. In fact, my wife and I guess that was 2 years ago now, we made a lot of American beautyberry jelly, which is a delicious edible berry. We also made a few jars of American beautyberry syrup. And syrup is what you call jelly that doesn't set. So that works. But there's all different niches, where those are shrubs or ground plants or ground covers, and they're edible plants that can fill that same role in what we call a food forest. So, but we want to make sure it's not wild. It doesn't look like the wild areas by your house. We're trying to use that same niche, putting the right plants in the right place, but we need it to look good too. So we don't have time to dig deep into landscape design principles, but all these you've heard before: unity, line, texture, balance, simplicity, sequence, emphasis, all these things we can incorporate into our edible landscape and have something that functions great, but also tastes great as well. If a lot of your landscape design it's just trial and error, make sure you design your landscape with the overall beauty of that you have in mind. So that can be, a lot of us may like more naturalistic meandering lines, or some of us may prefer more organized, clean angles. Make your garden friendly and interesting to you, and then who cares if your family or your neighbors like it? No, I'm kidding. You should design something that looks good for you and everybody as well. Considering structure, so different plants, how they grow, structure structure and forms are important. Movement. One thing that I was watching in the garden the other day is asparagus, and how that this time of year when the asparagus plants, kind of you're getting a little bronze after we get some cool temperature, but as it moves in the breeze, it really draws your eye in, and it becomes a focal point. Layering different heights, so with taller plants in the back, medium-sized plants in front of those, border plants, you can incorporate edible plants for those functions. Different color contrast. So many times you'll see at the Dallas Arboretum or in home landscapes, artichokes that are used. They have that gray foliage with kind of a strong structure and form. And if you plant plants that have maybe green leaves and smaller leaves, Yopon holly is maybe one of those, a shrub either in front or behind it, depending on which one you're looking at. Each one of those plants is going to pop a little bit more. And always incorporate evergreens. So evergreens are going to look great in the fall up to early spring. Especially important, I think, with edible landscapes, because many people think an edible landscape should just kind of be dead or drab over the winter, and that's not true at all. There are a lot of plants that have edible value that actually look great across the winter, and I promise we'll talk about those. So transitioning, just substitute your unproductive plant material for plant material that does have some kind of edible value, looking at the sun requirements, water requirements, especially when you're growing edibles. You need to look at nutrient rotation or just rotation to deter pests, so look at that. You don't want to plant tomatoes or peppers in the same spot year after year because of nematode problems there. It's a little bit harder to rotate plants in your landscape. You may have to just flip-flop year by year. Look at edible trees, vines, perennial vegetables, and then traditional annual vegetables as well. And it's funny how many times that we see now ornamental peppers. In fact, at Texas Tech, we did trial work on ornamental peppers, and I would go, after the trial was over, of course, I would eat every one of those peppers, and I would say 90% of them had some kind of flavor. There was 10% of them didn't taste good, and I would just spit them out, and that was that. But some of them were spicy, like Tabasco peppers. Some of them were sweet, like the little bag of peppers, colorful peppers you buy at the grocery store. And so if you're planting those ornamental peppers, give them a shot, see what they taste like. Also plant some of your traditional edible peppers in there as well, or the same thing with ornamental eggplants and eggplants. And then, maybe you want to incorporate other edible plants in your landscape. You do need to spend some time looking at the location, so make sure that you're putting plants in a spot that they will thrive. We like to say right plant, right place. The size of your plant is also important. Many times it's easy to cram too much stuff together in an edible landscape, so make sure you're planting for room to grow. Water is also important. Speaking from personal experience, you always want to plant the water first. If you don't have access, especially to edible plants, to water, you can have challenges when we start to see temperatures that get a little bit hot. So whether that is hand watering or some type of irrigation system, important to look at. Soil preparation is also important. Now, those of us that live in an area dominated by heavy clays, you may want to amend those soils with compost or expanded shale. And then really, when we're asked the question, what can we grow? I would always encourage you to either grow what you like to eat, or maybe more importantly, grow what your kids and your significant other likes to eat. You can only, sneak in Swiss chard and beets into so many dishes. So many times my wife's like, are there beets in this? No, there's no beets in this. And then she eats it, oh, it was good. And then 2 weeks later, I said, there was beets in this. I knew there was beets in there. But planning for function and production is important. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about proper spacing. If we imagine this is our backyard and we think we want to do an edible landscape here, who here thinks this is a good spot for an edible landscape? Who here thinks this is a bad spot for an edible landscape? Who here thinks this is a trick question? Yeah. So we need to look at, we're just looking at this two-dimensionally. If we have some trees here and maybe a Bermuda grass lawn and this is the spot, is that a good spot? We need to think about it three-dimensionally. So where is our sunlight? Now, who here thinks this is a good spot for an edible landscape? Now, who here thinks this is a bad spot? Now, who here still thinks this is a trick question? So we can look at it three-dimensionally, but we need to also think about the orientation. Which way is the sun coming up? Is the sun rising in the east? In that case, this would be shaded for the west sun, the hottest part of the day. If we go across the street to our neighbor's house and the sun is rising on the east here, then this may not get sunlight until 12 o'clock. And then during the hottest part of the summer, it may just get blasted. Certain plants would thrive in those conditions, but many plants would not be very successful. Now also, if we were thinking about this north and south, many times the north side of our homes, because we're on the northern hemisphere, that's going to be the shadiest spot. And I have a little bit of a description here. So in the fall, about this time, the sun's still rising in the east, setting in the west, but we're going to be at kind of that midpoint. In the winter, the sun sits lower in the sky, and so there's going to be more shadows that are cast, especially on the north side of our trees, our buildings, our fences. The sun will kind of rise above our house, so the spots that would get shade 3/4 of the year now getting sunlight in the hottest part of the day. So pay attention to that, the amount of sunlight on your property. There's some great resources online. Google Earth Pro has a sun tracker on there, and so you can see how much sunlight you're getting. The other good bonus, if you're trying to grow edible plants like your cool season leafy greens, and you have a lot of shade most of the year, if you have deciduous trees, what do deciduous trees do this time of year? They lose their leaves, free mulch. Keep that to mulch your vegetables. But then when the leaves fall, there's more sunlight in those spots. So underneath those deciduous trees may be the perfect spot to grow onions or spinach or other leafy greens like lettuces. And if you get Edible DFW magazine, we have an article. You can get that free at Whole Foods and Central Market that'll be talking about that next month. Plant size is also important, so make sure your plants have adequate spacing, air, and sunlight. Looking at the plant tags, looking at the seed packets is going to help point you in the right direction there. Making sure you plant edible plants that are adaptable to our environment, whether that is our macro environment. That is basically we're just looking at, hey, is this a plant that does good with 36 inches of rainfall? Is this a plant that will do good in high pH soils? Is this a plant that will do good in hardiness zone 8A, but also looking at the micro environment, the sun and shade on your property, the different building structures, irrigation systems you have, looking at in more detail. You can find some great information on your plant tag. So looking at the sun exposure, the height of the plant, making sure you don't plant stuff too close together. When we plant plants too close together, they're going to compete for sunlight, water, and nutrients. Specifically with our edible plants, that creates a problematic, some challenges there. But get to know it before you grow it. Become a better educated consumer, and you're going to be more productive in your edible landscape. Now, another thing that is very important, I know this is a lot of information, but test your soil. We have a link in your handout that you should have got, the edible landscape handout, to soiltesting.tamu.edu. Before you start digging, we recommend every 2 to 4 years getting a soil test, and they will, there's a form that you'll fill out, and then in that form, you'll check if you're growing edible plants. Maybe you're growing a fruit tree or some edible shrub or a vegetable garden, and we'll make recommendations onto what nutrients you need to add that you're deficient in, and then what amounts you need to apply those to. And you can get a basic soil test for under $10, and then one that will measure micro and macro nutrients for under $20. So really a great resource through the Texas A&M University system. Many times before you get your soil tests done, you may want to make some amendments, and you cannot beat compost. Compost is, I think, the best soil amendment that money can buy, but you don't have to. It can be made by the stuff we would normally be throwing away at home. Expanded shale is also a great amendment, especially for those higher value spots in your landscape. Now, the benefits of compost are going to help you hold moisture, which saves not only water but money. If you do have the heavy clay soils, it's going to improve drainage and nutrient availability. So many of our edible plants will start to see that intraveinal chlorosis, which is just a fancy science word for saying yellow in between the veins. And if you add compost, that will help buffer our pH and make the iron in the soil available that causes that issue. If you do have sandy soil, it will help prevent water loss and nutrient leaching. So we like to say compost is nature's Band-Aid. It has a lot of benefits. Now I said plant in the water first, but is your irrigation system consist of your hand and your arm and a hose and a faucet? And that's a great system. I think when you're first getting started or starting small, you may want to transition to drip irrigation or soaker hose. Now this investment is going to pay off on the long run. Drip irrigation is 90% efficient when compared to other irrigation methods. That means that 90% of the water is actually going into the soil. So not only will your plants take advantage being healthier and more vibrant, but that also reduces runoff, so it's going to save you money in the long run. Rainwater is also specifically a great asset for edible landscapes. Rainwater is chlorine-free, chloramine-free. It doesn't have many salts in that type of water. We'll notice in our vegetable garden, after it rains, you'll see just like this healthy vibrancy when we get periods of heavy rainfall, and we can tap into that with rainwater harvesting. We teach some classes on that at Water University. So drip irrigation, there's a lot of different types of drip, whether it's inline emitters, point source emitters, microtube emitters. We actually teach hands-on classes to walk you through that process. And a lot of people think that, oh, drip is not for me. I don't want to tie that into my sprinkler system. But you can actually fairly easily incorporate drip using your faucet. You need to have a backflow and a filter and a pressure reducer. But these components together are less than $100, and you can set a timer up and have a section of your edible landscape run a little bit more frequently, so you're not having to overwater the entirety of your landscape just for a few edible plants. You can water those supplementally on their own system. We call that kind of hydrozoning. If you have a pre-existing bed, remove your undesirable, struggling, or high-maintenance plants. Now, I would say if you focus on making the problem areas of your landscape healthier, you're going to exponentially beautify your landscape. So if you said, this area I kind of like, but I may want to make a few touches there, it's not really that noticeable. But you really focus on the eyesore, the spot that's been bothering you, and elevate that landscape, then really the whole part of your landscape will take advantage of those small changes. And then just replace with well-adapted edibles. And I promise we'll get to the plants. But before you actually put the plants in the ground, maybe you want to focus on the hardscape, the beds, the paths, trellises. I know a lot of times we'll put the plants in the ground, you think, oh, well, now I want to build this bed or this path. And if you're hiring your husband or your wife or maybe a local contractor, that's when you get people stepping on your plants. And from experience, that becomes a little bit of a challenge when you're a passionate plant person. Those are your little babies. When somebody steps on them, you get a little excited. Prep, so tilling, maybe that's amending with compost, setting up your irrigation system, incorporating landscape fabric around your pathways, or maybe sheet mulching, which is a technique of mulching and taking over maybe lawn areas for edible plants. So there are some great resources online that I wanted to touch on. Various planting guides for the Texas A&M University system. Those resources are linked in your handout, but if you forget, all you have to remember is this right here, TAMU, Texas A&M University. Now, when I used to tell some of the horticulture lab students at Texas Tech, Google TAMU, I got a lot of eyebrows raised. But the best state resources for growing edible plants, if you type in TAMU to Google and whatever problem you have, whether that's planting guide, yellow bug, potato, peach tree not producing, you'll get the Texas A&M University system, Texas A&M AgriLife, and all those programs information that will pop up there. There's also a great vegetable variety selector. So if you're looking at vegetables that look pretty, but also are adapted to Grapevine, you can actually go and type in your county here, what specific vegetable you want to grow, and there's research data based on the productivity that shows which plants are best adapted to your neck of the woods. There's also a lot of great heirloom varieties that you can tap into. I really like to grow vegetables that not only look great, but also are adaptable to heat and to drought. So look at your various seed catalogs, heirloom seeds, look at which ones have been developed for hot and dry areas, and you'll have more production than you would if maybe you're planting a variety that is better adapted to Idaho or Iowa or somewhere that is not the extreme Texas. There's a lot of, with the A&M system, a lot of great resources on fruit and nut production. So if you want to read a 3 or 4 page fact sheet on pecan production or peach production, growing blackberries, what have you, some great resources there. There's also commercial grower guides. So if you want to read 15 pages on growing those same subjects, which I think a lot of people in this room may want to take advantage of them, you can just type in TAMU fruit and nut, and this will pop up with not only how to plant, how to fertilize, common pest and disease problems that will help you in your edible landscape. And the same fact sheets are available for our vegetable as well. So, all right, get talking to the plants already. Well, I just wanted to go over quickly some of my favorite plants for their edible value. Now, many of these are on the back of your handout, so you may not have to take notes. I know I talk fast. Mulberry. Now, this isn't the fruitless mulberry that is sometimes planted in landscapes that shades everything out. There's one specifically in Illinois, everbearing mulberry. It's a dwarf mulberry, so only gets maybe 10, 12 feet tall, and will actually produce it's like a blackberry, a mulberry that's been stretched out. So it can be 1.5 inches, 2 inches long, has mulberries that people say taste better than a blackberry. In fact, many times at grocery stores now, you can buy dehydrated mulberries that are absolutely fantastic, but they grow very well in north central Texas. Now, I've mentioned pecans and walnuts. Those both grow incredibly. I would say if you're growing a pecan, don't plant it close to your driveway or your house. A pecan just has to hear thunder and it will drop a branch. Persimmons are ripening this time of year, so persimmons believed to be eaten at the first Thanksgiving. And I made a persimmon pudding last year, a recipe that was 109 years old. A fantastic plant. Never eat an unripe persimmon. Persimmon, Diospyros, actually means fruit of the gods. And when you eat a ripe persimmon, it does taste like a fruit of the gods. If you eat an unripe persimmon, you will never forget that experience. So make sure it's as soft as an overripe banana before you eat it. It has nothing to do with frost, so I've been eating persimmons last week. Just make sure that it is soft, and that means it's ripe. The same thing with figs. Figs bought from a grocery store, figs don't have to ripen like other fruits. So you have to get a fig that is ripe. It needs to be plucked from the tree. And the way I know that it's ripe, if I pick it and my thumbprint is left in the skin, that's how you know that it's ripe. And there is no fruit that tastes better to me than a ripe fig. It's the only tree that produces candy. A variety of different types, and they grow very well here. Peaches. If you want to grow one fruit tree, it is really hard to mess up growing a peach. You only need to grow one. Make sure you're getting a peach that grows in our chill hours, so about 800 or so right now, give or take a few. Plums. There's European plums. Some of our native plums, Mexican plums, are delicious if you eat them when they're ripe. All different types of plums are very adaptable to north central Texas. A lot of people are surprised to see citrus. So there are 2 different types of satsumas and mandarins that are called horticulturist. So if you protect them in our area on the south side of your house or cover them up, when you get really cold, you can get some production. Also kumquats. There are 2, 3 different varieties of Japanese kumquats that are cold hardy down to about 10 degrees. Meiwa is one of those, and it's like eating marmalade. Delicious, delicious. Apples, although we do have problems with fire blight around here, there are many low chill varieties of apples that do great. Some of those apple cultivars are extrememely delicious. So there's the Pippin series that are rated a 10 out of a 10 in terms of flavor. Now, you may like Granny Smith, or you may like Jazz or Golden Delicious, and those are rated like a 6 out of 10. And then there's the Red Delicious that is rated a -2 out of 10. in. I don't. No, I'm kidding. I think what is it? What was I saying? Red Delicious apples are fantastic. Doorstops. Jujubes or ziziphus are fantastic. Now this is a plant that is not native but very well adapted to our area. It's called Chinese date. When you eat it fresh, it tastes like an apple or a pear. When you let it ripen, it does taste like a date as it starts to wrinkle. Extremely sweet. Pomegranates do very well here. Full sun, well-draining soil. If you have that spot, try different pomegranates. Wonderful pomegranates did a wonderful job of advertising, but many of the Russian cultivars are better adapted to our area. Asian pears, again, susceptible to fire blight like our apples, but is a great gift around Christmas. You buy those and they come in their little sweaters built in, shipped in the boxes, but these are pears that we can grow in our area fairly well. And then loquats, I already mentioned. Loquats, they're evergreen. They won't produce every year, so similar to nectarines, you're planting for every 2 or 3 years, but when you get a bumper crop, they're fantastic. Tastes like a sweet mango or a tropical fruit. Now, tree selection is very important in an edible landscape for sure. But what's the problem? If you put the right tree in the wrong place, well, it kind of makes things a little confusing. So if you put the right tree in the right place, if you put evergreens on the northern side of your house, you can create a little bit of a windbreak on a buffer. If you put deciduous trees on the south or the southwest side of your house, they can block the sun in the summer, and then as they lose their leaves, let in some warmth of the sun in the winter. And then this is something that I wish the people in my neighborhood would listen to. Plant dwarf trees under power lines. We're out of power right now. I'm living with my parents after the damaging storms a few days ago. Was that yesterday? 2 days ago. Anyway, if you plant a tree that gets 40 foot tall under a 30-foot power line, that doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Either these companies are going to cut your plants in a way that you don't like, but if you plant dwarf cultivars, they're just easier to manage in the long run. Some edible shrubs that I like, elderberries, are actually native to these parts. You can make syrups from them that people believe will shorten the length of the flu. Also, you can eat the flowers fresh, and they're actually really great in cocktails. In fact, many famous cocktails incorporate elderberry liqueur. Nanking cherry, another prunus that is adaptable to our area. It's a shrub that produces a little cherry. Juneberry, while blueberries aren't very well adapted to our area, juneberries can handle our alkaline soil. Bay laurel, plant a bay laurel and you'll never need to buy bay leaves at the store. If it only gets, 3 to 6 foot tall, that's way more bay than you could process in soups and stews. A silverberry, anybody familiar with this shrub? It's commonly planted. You may know it as Elaeagnus or autumn olive. If you don't like it, some people call it ugly Agnes. I don't know why. I don't call it that. But in February, they produce a little fruit that tastes like a raspberry. Delicious, very sweet when you eat it when it's ripe. And then the seed on the inside is also edible, and it tastes like a peanut. So if you imagine a raspberry with a peanut inside, entirely edible, and is also a nitrogen fixer. Goji berries have more lycopene. It's called a superfood, or a shrub that are adaptable to our area. Blackberries, clove currants, also something that we can grow here if you're looking for a shrub that provides ornamental value as well as edibility. Showy vegetables also are at home in an edible landscape. Artichokes and their cousin cardoons are planted for their ornamental value all the time. Beets make a great border plant this time of year. So if you're looking for a winter border, beets are related to Swiss chard. I actually prefer the foliage of beets to their roots, and so you can take advantage there. Kale, ornamental kales, many are the same cultivars as our edible kales. Plant those. Beans that have showy pods and seeds. Swiss chard, peppers, eggplant. We've talked about those. Annual borders, cool season borders of lettuces, a variety of different colors and textures that do great. Sunchokes, I'll talk about on the next slide. Sweet potatoes. Ornamental sweet potatoes are all the rage. Why not just propagate your own sweet potato slips? And you'll get the vine that is great, but also an edible tuber that is fantastic. Asparagus is a great perennial, prized for its ornamental value, as is arugula. Arugula, many many times is a reseeder. So you plant it once, you're harvesting spring, it gets bitter into the summer, then you can harvest fall until it freezes back. But a great showy vegetable. Perennial vegetables you plant once, but then you get the benefit year after year. So asparagus, artichokes. Now Jerusalem artichokes are a helianthus. So it's native to South Texas, northern Mexico. It looks like a sunflower, but it produces an edible root that some people say tastes better than a potato. Chives and sorrel, asparagus and artichokes, each of those you'll plant once and you can enjoy the flavor and its ornamental value from years to come. There are also some shade-tolerant veggies if you are not blessed with a lot of sunlight on your property. Again, if you focus on the cool season crops, as your trees begin to lose their leaves, you'll get a little bit more sunlight there. So you can plant annual borders around your deciduous trees of arugula, Asian greens, chives, cilantro, kale, lettuce, a mesclun mix that has a variety of lettuces and arugula. Our beets, carrots, radishes, and spinach all can do pretty well with 4 to 5 hours of sunlight or more. There are a lot of herbs that have great ornamental value. So dill, rosemary, pineapple sage, mints, oregano, sorrels, onions, and chives, thymes, and cilantro, all fantastic additions to the borders of your plant. There are also many variegated versions of our favorite herbs. So oregano and marjoram, various sages, culinary sages, mints, thyme, and society garlic that look fantastic, but also are highly edible and can be used on a daily basis for cooking. Now, there are some new edible plants on the market, and this is one to look for in the spring, but Balsamic Blooms Basil has these incredible clusters of purple sepals that contrast with the light pink flowers, but is one of the most highly ornamental basils kind of new to the market. In fact, it is a Texas superstar. So too late to be planting it now, but for the spring, you might want to write that one down. There are also ways that we can expand our edible palette. So think of things that look great and taste great, but you may not know that these are edible. And if you incorporate edible flowers and interesting edibles in your landscape, it will help you make the edible part of your garden look great year-round. So borage is one that we can plant in the spring. It tastes like cucumber if you've never eaten the flowers. Great forage for bees. Nasturtiums taste like pepper. Fantastic. You can eat the leaves or the flowers there. Dianthus, which many people are putting in the ground, are fantastic. They can be sweet and floral. Squash, if you're eating your male squash blooms, as long as you save a few to pollinate the females, you can stuff those with ricotta or fry them, a variety of different dishes. Lavender blooms, of course, are edible, as is cornflower, daylilies, violas, and pansies. Roses, many roses are edible, not only in their flowers or their petals, but also in their fruit. Of the rose hips, you can make tea. Just make sure, though, that it's you try a little nibble. Many roses are pleasantly floral, where cuisines all around the world use roses to flavor desserts, and rose water used to be, early in America, was something very sought after in cuisine. It's making a comeback. Other rose petals, if you taste it, tastes like you've sprayed your grandmother's perfume on your tongue. So just keep an idea in mind there. Not to say I've ever done that, but and then after you put all these plants in the ground, make sure you cover your soil. If you mulch, not only will that increase the amount of moisture in your soil for the long run, ever important in edible plants, but it will reduce weed pressure. That mulch will break down into plant nutrients and compost in place. Also, when it does rain, if you have 4 inches of mulch, you have the potential to get 60% more rainfall infiltrate into the ground versus bare soil. So covering your soil with mulch is going to help more of those raindrops actually slow spread and sink and provide water and moisture for your roots. Now, I also wanted to, I don't have a lot of time, but do want to introduce this great resource. If you have problems with your edible landscape, with pests specifically, vegetableipm.tamu.edu. IPM means Integrated Pest Management. So specifically with edible landscapes, we don't want to use the spray and pray practice. We don't want to see, oh, there's a bug on there, spray it with whatever chemical that I have. You want to pay special attention to, is this rated to be sprayed on an edible crop? And then if I do spray it, is it something that I can eat and harvest right after? Is it for my pet, for my dog? So IPM, you would identify the pest first, then look, are there any cultural or mechanical practices to control it? So mechanical practice means taking the tomato hornworm and just picking it off and kind of throwing it to the chickens or throwing it in the dumpster. And then if we are going to treat it, can we do it in a way that's either organic or non-toxic, or if it is using synthetic pesticides, if we're doing it in a way that is applied per label instructions. Your edible garden could be, bountiful, dense, diverse, eccentric, and wild as you are, but it also can be more clean and orderly. If you like those kind of clean forms and lines, you can have more English-style garden, incorporated edible plants into that one as well that are orderly and formal. As I close in, I always like this quote: the best fertilizer is the gardener's shadow. And I think this is more true in edible landscapes. If you spend time in your garden, if your edible landscape is an area that you frequent, it's an area that is convenient for you to go and harvest, but also to see if there are any pest issues. If this plant needs a little bit more water, this one needs a little bit more fertilizer. I see aphids here, and I could just pull that leaf off rather than leave it for 2 or 3 days and the aphid populations grow exponentially. Or maybe you can catch that okra or zucchini before it goes from 2 inches to 12 inches overnight. Spend time in your garden. Not only is that better for your plants, but we know now that it's better for our mental health and our physical health. And I knew that's stuff that I need all the time. So that is all the time I have for the presentation. I would love to open it up for questions if we have time for those. Yes, so I get the question, what is the best mulch all the time? And I like to say my favorite mulch is the mulch that's on sale or the mulch that's free. So I use grass clippings around my vegetables a lot. I use leaves. Those could be just leaves from the tree. One trick that sounds kind of silly, but if you want to shred your leaves, you can put them in a metal trash can and then make sure you have eye protection. And then put your weed eater in there, and it will chop up the leaves fairly easily. Now, I'll usually use that as a base, and then that makes me use about half as much as whatever mulch I would buy. So if I put that layer down, I really like pine straw. Pine straw not only in my vegetable garden, but it transitions into my edible landscape, my regular landscape very well. Pine straw can be a little expensive, so if I put a layer of grass clippings and leaves on the bottom, you don't know that they're there, right? So I can just sprinkle the pine straw on top. It looks nice in either type of landscape. If you're making a trip to East Texas, pine is extremely inexpensive there. It can be a little more pricey locally. So we have plenty of wood chips now, of course, with the recent storms. And so that one, I think, could work very well around our perennials. I don't like to put wood chips around my annual vegetables. There's potential to bind a little bit nitrogen there. If you are doing it, it's fine and it works. Just add a little bit of nitrogen. We'll help you out in the long run. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I have not seen Turk's cap. Is it not edible at all?
No, Turk's cap is 100% edible. That was the question. I love Turk's cap. In fact, you can make jelly from Turk's cap. The fruits that are ripe this time of year, they're called a Turk's apple. Wait till they get a little wrinkle and they're a little bit sweeter. You can also eat the Turk's cap flowers. So you just pluck the flowers from the sepal, and the white part of the flower is very sweet. You eat the whole thing. It's kind of sweet and floral. You could put it in syrup and dress up fancy cocktails. You could put it on top of a quiche and really have an interesting look there. But yeah, this class was mostly focused on edible plants that have ornamental value. I also teach a program that is just the edible value of landscape plants, and then we have a foraging class, which is the edible value of wild plants. And I like to incorporate all those in my landscape. In fact, I have a little side yard where I leave a few dandelions so I can harvest those in the winter. I try and hide them from my neighbors, but yes, ma'am.
He had some friends that came from Oregon, and he was very proud of his dog who would hunt out truffles.
Oh, yes.
So can we do that here?
Yes, so the question was about, she has a friend who has a dog that will hunt out truffles. And we do have a Texas pecan truffle here that is not only indigenous to Texas, but it is indigenous to the Metroplex. There aren't a lot of dogs that are trained to find pecan truffles, and pecan truffles are a challenge, although they can be trained for sure, and there are some. In fact, the part of that research, the PhD that discovered the pecan truffle was one of my professors, and they actually hired a dog from Oregon that came and found pecan truffles in DFW, and that is Dr. Jyotsna Sharma, and you can find that research, and they have a map in Texas of where they've found pecan truffles, and I have a dog that has been used to find truffles of something, yeah, so they're right under the soil surface, and it's just a challenge to find them. If you were going and digging for them, some people will use a rake, and so that's why historically people have used dogs or pigs, but it is something that I want to pursue, I just haven't at this point. Was there another question? Let me get you, sir, and then you.
What do you think are the best tasting flowers? I know the best tasting flowers I've ever tried pineapple.
Yeah. Yeah, so the question was about my personal favorite tasting flowers or best tasting flowers. That is a hard one. And so definitely any of our herbs produce a flower. So mint flowers are great, basil flowers, oregano, thyme. It's typically just going to be a more intense version of that spice. In fact, when you're deadheading, many of our herbs, you can use that to make pesto. So you could use flowers of onions, garlic, what have you there. And same thing with Turk's cap flowers are pretty good and sweet. I'm trying to think of flowers that are sweet. Pansies sometimes, depending on the pansy, can taste like a little bit like spearmint, and then sometimes they're more savory. Lavender is, again, an excellent flower. Squash is kind of a neutral taste in flower. Dianthus is fairly neutral. Honeysuckle, everyone grew up eating honeysuckle, which is an invasive around here. And I actually took a bunch of honeysuckle blooms in the spring and packed those in the sugar. And so using that sugar to kind of finish desserts, you kind of have that spring feel there. There is a great list of all the edible flowers online. And there's maybe 50 or 60 of them, and they're all kind of personal preference in terms of taste. But I'm trying to think of like one that really knocks your sock off. Mexican mint marigold is one that we use a lot in cocktails. So my wife likes a Moscow Mule, and I'll muddle in the leaves and then float the flowers on top. But a lot of people eat with their eyes, so the edible flowers desserts are really sought after. In fact, now at most of our grocery stores, you can buy pansies or now dianthus that people candy and will use on desserts and cakes. But try them all. Hemerocallis daylilies are also very good. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, Illinois everbearing is one. There are a couple other cultivars of mulberries. So most of our mulberries that produce a fruit you can actually eat. So whether that's our Native American, there's a Texas little leaf mulberry that produces a fantastic fruit that's actually native not too far from here. But our Chinese mulberries also produce an edible fruit. And they're fantastic dried or fresh any way you would eat a blackberry. With your mulberries, however, make sure you're eating them when they're completely ripe. You do not want to eat an unripe mulberry, and you can Google that for more information.